Okay, welcome back, folks, for the second Cookie Pocket Holiday Special of 2022. Now, you might be thinking, Christmas has passed. What holiday are we possibly celebrating for this special? Well, how dare you forget the most important of holidays, National Short Film Day.
International Short Film Day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is when this episode should be dropping. So, happy holidays and happy December the 28th and happy National Short Film Day. Which, appropriate enough, we are covering a short film on today's holiday special, which is The Signalman, an adaptation of a Charles Dickens story, which was part of the BBC's Ghost Story for Christmas series, where they would put out an adaptation of a classic ghost story every Christmas Eve, usually by M.R. James, but this one was by Charles Dickens. It was the first one to be adapted from a story that wasn't by M.R. James when it came out in 1976. In the film, a traveler whose origins we never really learn comes across a signalman in a rail box in sort of a tunnel, and it's his job day in and day out to just signal the trains and switch the tracks. But he tells the traveler of a strange specter that he has seen on the job and what he thinks it might mean. It's a very simple little story, but I think it's pretty effective. What did you guys think of The Signalman?
Christian can go first.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. I said it was a solid work given its confines, and I stand by that. I gave it a 3 out of 5, and I generally enjoyed it. But, and this is not a criticism of The Signalman itself, but it just, more than anything, it made me interested and curious to see more films in the sort of under an hour range. Because when I hear short film, I think of really, really short. I think of like 5 to 10 minutes or maybe 20 at most. And so I guess this as a TV special, what was this, like 38?
38
something?
minutes.
Yeah. Denholm Elliott is awesome. I am a big fan of his from Indiana Jones, which I think Zach cited in one of his Signalman reviews. But totally not what I expected from him in this, which was before Raiders?
Yeah,
yes.
I think it's like 5 years before the first one even.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was neat. I have no experience with the Dickens story it is based off of. And I hate to say this, Zach, but I was kind of frustrated by the standard definition quality on YouTube. It was kind of frustrating.
I found a higher resolution copy the next day. It wasn't like HD, but it was 720 instead of 480.
No, that's a huge difference. You should send that our way, even though we were already doing this now. I would still be curious to at least see how a couple key moments play out. But the effects that are here, I don't mean necessarily like special or practical or whatever, but the effect in the sense what it is meant to produce in the viewer, I think that always works, really. And yeah, good performances, reasonably concise, 3 out of 5. It didn't stick in my consciousness too much after watching it, but I appreciate it for what it is.
Alrighty.
So this is the prequel to The Briefcase, Zach. I always knew. It's all connected.
It's all connected, yes.
Yes. City Mist Productions. I sure did see a lot of mist in this, Zach. And possibly near the city.
Yeah. And it was definitely a production.
It was.
Wow.
Confirmed.
Wow. Okay. I really like this. I'm really a fan of Dickens and the way that he writes, and I'm a fan of ambiguity when it comes to whether or not events happen, and when it's kind of driven by a ghost story is like the main derivative of how like imagery is produced and how like the story can be interpreted in different ways. And I feel like, at least compared to A Christmas Carol, I feel like this is even more ambiguous. Maybe it's also because of the length and because of the limited scope of everything compared to A Christmas Carol. but at the same time, I think that wide interpretation really works in the smaller scale here, just because there's very simple things that happen, like very simple shots that kind of say a lot on their own, and I feel like that's like the biggest marker of a good like short film that's very low budget. And I think the atmosphere is really well produced, and obviously both of the leads I think are really impactful and deliver their lines well. But I mean, there's nothing like terribly crazy to write home about, I guess, and I guess it's kind of to be expected. But at the same time, I think I really think like it's more about Dickens's writing and his imagery, because I actually did like read most of the short story in preparation for this, and it's pretty similar to the it's pretty much like the same thing as the film, honestly. Yeah. And I think that it says more about Dickens, I think, than the actual like quality of the film. I don't think there's anything that really like is massively sticks out. But I totally agree with Christian. I think they should do more adaptations like this. I really think the atmosphere is very like consistent and constantly spooky, and it's about what you don't know that scares you. Yeah. That kind of attitude lingering in the background, and I think that works pretty well. I mean, it captivated my attention the entire time too. It doesn't really show its age too much, but yeah, Marcus Brody, spooky boy, philosopher man that does math and learns foreign languages because his life is meaningless.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed this as well. I don't think it's I haven't seen like the entirety of the Ghost Stories for Christmas series, but of the ones that I have seen, I've seen this, and I've seen one that's kind of an unofficial entry in the series called Whistle and I'll Come to You, which I kind of think that one is more frightening. Maybe we'll talk about that next year. But I think this is a solid production, The Signalman is, at least. And I think I'm also maybe a little more impressed by it because I have seen a lot more network British television from the 70s, where usually stuff like this is very cut dry, 3 cameras, one's medium, one's wide, one's close up. We have one take to do a scene, and then we have 5 other scenes to shoot today. Move. And so you don't really get much like ingenuity or variety from a lot of these. But The Signalman is kind of sticks out as being different from a lot of television at the time because it was shot on location, entirely on 16mm film. Because at the time, the practice at the BBC was you shoot film on location and you shoot videotape in studio because it's quicker and easier. But they didn't have technology at the time to shoot with videotape outdoors. So because of the nature of the story, you got to shoot it on film. So it looks nicer, regardless of the resolution, just because film picks up better contrast and varieties of light than videotape does. And there's also some kind of ahead of its time direction in this, especially for TV. I think of there's a scene where the signalman is in his booth and all the bells start to go off at once. And you see like a shot which is like the reflection of his face in one of the bells, and then the camera like handheld whips over here to his perspective as he's moving around and using the various handles, and there's canted angles, and it almost looks like something out of like The Evil Dead or something like that. So I do think it's sort of ahead of its time, especially for television. And I think the bits that are meant to be creepy are solidly spooky. It's nothing too off-putting because these were meant for broadcast at like Christmas Eve. So the tradition is sort of something a little spooky, a little frightening, but not so much that it kind of ruins the holiday. And then you go on to Christmas Eve with just that little scare. And I think it works pretty well for that. So 3 out of 5. I certainly don't think that it's perfect, but I do think, particularly in its visuals, it's quite strong, especially for a product of its era and of its nature being a TV film. So you guys both already kind of touched on Denholm Elliott's performance, but as Christian cited, and I cited in a Letterboxd review, he was mostly known, or he's mostly known now, at least in America, for playing Marcus Brody in the Indiana Jones films, and is kind of forgotten other than that. but in the UK, he's a pretty well-remembered character actor. He showed up in a lot of Hammer films and a couple of Amicus Productions films, and he also was in a couple episodes of the Hammer horror anthology TV series. But what did we think of him as a lead performer, which wasn't always his wheelhouse? What did we think of his performance in this short film?
Well, I suppose I'll go first again.
Mm-hmm.
I welcome the theatrical approach here. And I don't think that it's too much, because there's enough going on for the character where it makes sense for him to sort of have an unnatural edge to his actions and reactions in the way that he speaks and appears. Mm-hmm. Because the Signalman is a lonely occupation, I imagine. And I mean, I was reading the Wikipedia page, and it seems like the Traveler is not even a feature of the original Dickens story. Is that right? And the Signalman is just narrating it himself in the short story. Is that true?
It's been a while since I read the story, so Mitchell, you might kind of be the authority on this.
So when I was talking about the ambiguity about it, literally, like, it's. I will say, like, the writing. The one thing I'll criticize is that it's very ambiguous. So okay. Like, there's not even there's question as to whether there even is a traveler. There's not any question that there is a signalman, but like his interpretation of events is so skewed, and because of his occupation and him, suffering under those conditions for so long, it's kind of difficult to tell like who is what and whether or not he actually sees a ghost and all that.
Okay.
So
yeah. So I kind of have a thing where I say that not every exposition dump is created equal.
Okay.
Which sounds really unconstitutional. But like the example that of a better exposition dump than usual that I often like to use is, at least in my opinion, comes in, oddly enough, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Not Denholm Elliott's character, but Julian Glover's character is laying out like the history of the Grail, yada yada, to Indiana Jones, and I think that scene is generally compelling in its writing and the way it plays out. I think the same can be said for the Signalman sort of laying out his history and why he does what he does to the Traveler, and the rest of the film kind of lives and dies off of that outline. So that's all Denholm Elliott, and I give him credit for that.
Yeah, I think especially because the actual like lines don't like demand an awful lot from him. I think just excelling in those major plot moments, I feel like, is the most important, and I feel like he does that really well. And I think his range, it is kind of sad because I do think his range could probably expand a little bit beyond just being like lonely and not as forthright with his experience at first, and then being extremely concerned and then kind of insane towards the end. Because it's all kind of like, he's supposed to be ambiguous. He's kind of supposed to be like mysterious. So, well, I think those moments of frustration really stick out when like leading up to that, leading up to those kind of like that climactic moment shortly before he dies. And I think that really lends a lot of credibility to his acting. But I mean, like, there's only so much you can do in 40 minutes. So, I mean, what happened is what happened. Okay. James Cameron did a James Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice to see him break a little bit out of the mold, I guess, that people remember him as a performer in. Because I think, especially because one of his most well-known roles is Marcus Brody, and based on other things he's cast in, he's kind of remembered as this actor who played, like, foppish civil servants and sort of, I guess, maybe, like, absent-minded professors, but people who don't necessarily have a ton of presence in a situation. But I think he's great in this as a sort of gruff, almost off-putting person. He has this really malleable face as a performer, where based on how you light him, he can be this sort of bumbling comedy character like we see in the Indiana Jones films, or he can be this very kind of mysterious cipher, almost like you pointed out, Mitchell. There's a scene early on in this where the traveler first moves into the signal box and is kind of taking his seat and familiarizing himself with the surroundings. And you see this close-up of Denholm Elliott's face lit by the fire, and the shadows from the bars of the fireplace are cast across his face. And he looks quite creepy, and the way that he just kind of stares at him is really off-putting. And that's all just in the performance that he brings to just a look. I think a lot of character actors almost end up in that unfortunate category where, because they can do a lot of things well, they never get asked to do one thing really well.
Yeah.
And so they don't become like a huge movie star. Like maybe, I don't know, let's say a Harrison Ford, a very, versatile actor, but the directors and studios found the thing that he could do and do really well, and so that kind of became the thing that he was known for, and he became a big star for that. Even though we do see him stretch outside of that box in other films, and he does comedy as his weird nerdy investigator voice in Blade Runner. But yeah, he can go outside of that box, but he became a star for his one thing, whereas Denholm Elliott kind of went all over the place throughout his career. But I do think it's an effective performance, and I always like to see... I'm a big champion for character actors. I always try to bring them up when they crop up, even if it's just for like a scene in the films that we talk about on this show.
It's always Sam Rockwell whenever we're watching something.
Well, there was that one guy in The Pianist who was in like the one scene, and he says like, "Oh, they kicked me out of my house," and then for me that was like, "Oh, my guy from the BBC."
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
that's what I remember from that.
He's the little guy with the glasses.
Sure.
Okay. Like I mentioned, this was the 6th installment in the BBC's A Ghost Story for Christmas series. And it's meant to be kind of spooky, and I think we all pointed out that it was a little eerie, but addressing that in more detail, did you guys find it frightening? And do you think there's a value to telling this kind of story around the holidays?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Damn, I should have asked why.
Yeah, now I get 100% on that question.
Yeah.
That's 5 points right there. Yeah, I mean, I don't really see, like, how this is... Is this a Christmas movie? That's a real question.
Oh, boy, let's not go down that well.
I just made the well. I just made the well.
I was going to question that, too.
I think...
Yeah.
So, there's a reason that The Most Wonderful Time of the Year includes the line, and scary ghost stories of Christmases long, long ago. Because it used to be a tradition. We've kind of lost this in the cheery Muzak commercialism of what Christmas is nowadays. But there used to be a tradition where, Christmas was a time of merriment, but you also told scary ghost stories around the fire. That's kind of dropped away, but that's sort of what this is in reference to.
So the BBC does it different over there, huh?
I mean, they barely do it anymore. They do like one every 5 years or so.
We like to have fun in the USA.
Yes, and in the UK, we like to be miserable in the rain with our beans.
Yeah, and trains. Well, I will say that the atmosphere in this is the most spooky. I feel like it really translates Dickens's imagery well. And I think that is probably the spookiest thing. I don't think reusing that same shot with that weird corpse with the eyes closed does wonders the third time. But
okay.
I also think that like you're saying about the frantic cinematography and the lighting, I just think a lot of this is really set up to forward the dialogue, and I feel like it really meshes well with the dialogue and it being like the primary focus, this being an adaptation. And I think the deaths are very impactful and short, and it's more about what is surrounding the deaths and the themes that are more important than the actual like scares themselves. and it just all of it feeds into that, generating the atmosphere. And I think that's what's most spooky about this. And I think also it's noticeable what time of year it is, and sitting around the fireplace, and I think all that is, and a lot of it being either like dark or just not like fully bright out at all. I think all of that makes it feel like it's a winter movie, I would say. And I do think that this works as what you described, Zach. It definitely is like a Christmas around the fireplace telling terrible stories about what it's like to be a signalman, I guess. And human existence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would echo pretty much all of those. What exactly were your questions against?
I asked, did you find it frightening? And do you think there's a value in telling this kind of story around the holidays?
Yes, definitely a value in telling this. And I think, I know it's not necessarily like an observed tradition on a broad scale, but I do think there are a not inconsequential number of people that share your view about the spooky story thing. Mm-hmm. So, some optimism there. I agree with Mitchell. I think the spookiest stuff is the atmosphere. The specter, like the bride, is that's like fine, but it's like it's scary enough, and it's nothing that like qualified as a jump scare for me, or really like deeply frightened me. But these days, that's how I like my horror. I like going, oh, that was kind of spooky, and then moving on. So, it was fine. And, I think I like the ending a lot. I should mention specifically, because we're kind of just left with nothing, which feels very fitting. We're left to feel, I mean, like Denholm Elliott, to me, is like the only anchor, like the only real entity that we can connect with, despite how well realized the space is and the conflict. And so when he's, spoiler alert, then it's just wow, we're just left with the coldness and the emptiness of that space, and what it is to be a signalman.
when he's knocked over taking a nap on the train tracks, instead of being splattered across the freaking
that was
tracks.
One thing. I watched this. I convinced my family to watch this with me.
Wow.
Because I want to make it a tradition that we watch an episode of A Ghost Story for Christmas every Christmas Eve. And that was the one thing that the next day my dad was like, he would not be lying on those tracks like he'd been hit by a wagon. He would be splattered across the entire cutting. But you can't splash Denholm Elliott's entrails on the wall on Christmas Eve. So I was okay with it. I do agree that it's a little distracting that he's just like on the tracks. Even if he was like down like in the ditch next to the track, you could maybe kind of say like, oh, he tried to jump, but it still hit him and that killed him. But the fact that he's just sort of right in the middle lying down, I agree. That is a little stagey, I guess, perhaps. But I do think I like the atmosphere in this. There are bits of it, though, that are meant to be sort of scares that do have kind of an eerie, off-putting quality to them. I don't think... the thing with the Spectre is, with the Spectre, everything is in the build-up. So as soon as you see the Spectre, it's never going to be as frightening as the anticipation of the Spectre is in your head. I think like the wide shots of the Spectre just kind of waving through the fog are very creepy. And when he gets out of the booth and kind of walks toward it, there is sort of a rising tension of, what are you doing? Don't go talk to that thing. What is he going to do? And even a moment of like, when he kind of lowers his hands. But as soon as you see the Spectre, and then as soon as you keep seeing it, I do agree with Mitchell. It kind of loses that shock. It's a consistent issue that shows up basically in anything that tries to make you suspense, is that at some point you have to break the suspense, and depending upon how you built the suspense, the payoff is never going to be as satisfying or as impactful as the suspense building to it was. an unfortunate flaw in the structure of a lot of ghost stories, especially. It's not as much a problem in writing, because in writing you get to leave things to the viewer's imagination, or the reader's imagination, which can't be the case in film a lot of the time. But I do think I mentioned that I watched this with my family on Christmas Eve. I think that even though kind of the tradition of ghost stories has maybe faded away, there's still a great tradition of anticipation around Christmas Eve. It's sort of a more joyful anticipation and suspense in regard to, like, what's tomorrow going to be like? Tomorrow's Christmas Day, and there's an excitement there, but I do think there's a suspense there as well. And so I think this kind of taps into that. I think these classic ghost stories set around Christmas do kind of tap into that in a nice way. This year we watched this back to back. We watched The Polar Express, which is a tradition that my sister insists on. We gotta watch The Polar Express on Christmas Eve. And then I managed to sneak in The Signalman right afterward. So I think maybe packaging this with kind of a shorter, like 90-minute, more festive Christmas film is a good idea, because you get a bit of the maybe kind of morbid anticipation, but then you've also kind of got the fun Christmas imagery to go with it. So I recommend it. We all knew that was going to happen anyway. But I recommend it. I think it's a fun tradition, and I'm eager to check out more of these as the years go by. That's everything that I had to ask. A short little set of questions for a short little film. But any final thoughts before we move on?
I will also say that this is this works really well period-wise, because I feel like there's kind of like a gruffness when it comes to like low-budget practical effects in horror in the 70s.
Yeah.
And I feel like this really, like the time period of it being in like the Industrial Revolution, like the mid-1800s, I feel like that like rough, the trains and the clanking of machinery and the ringing of the bells and everything is very on point, and I think that just adds the atmosphere. But I give it 3.5 out of 5. I feel like if you got 40 minutes and you like a little spooky morbidness on the birth of Jesus Christ Day, so if that's what you like, then go for it. Go for it. I'm waiting for Santa Claus. Zach's waiting to get hit by a train. That's all I have to say.
It's the Christmas train.
Oh my god. Well, I'm joining Mitchell. Those are my two options. I was going to say they should bring back Denholm Elliott for Dial of Destiny, but he died like 3 years after Last Crusade was released.
He did, yeah.
So, F.
His last
Sorry
crusade.
for laughing about you being dead.
Unlike Sean Connery, who they claimed was dead, and I mean he is now, but they claimed he was dead in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but he was very much alive at the time.
Came back. I came back to slap a woman once in a while.
Oh my god.
That's his legacy now.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Well, this is fun. Zach, tell us what to do next.
Okay, all right. I didn't know if your thoughts were finished, Christian. I would just say, if you are a filmmaker, I recommend Ghost Stories for Christmas as well, because they're all quite small-scale, short stories that indicate what you can do with some ingenuity, 3 costumes, and the money to rent a train. I mentioned in my second Letterboxd review, the only thing in this that would cost an insubstantial amount to reproduce if you wanted to remake this film would be the train. I could probably go out with a couple of friends from film school and shoot something pretty close to this in a national park, and you'd still be able to bring the camera work to it. You can make solid films on a short time scale and a low budget. It's doable. They do it professionally. Go out and make movies. 3 out of 5. Okay, now we will move on to our segments as is traditional. First off, the week in review. What have you guys been watching or reading or listening to since we last did a special?
I think I know what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to open this can of beans that's been boiling on the back burner. That was a good alliteration there. For a bit. I think we all have something to say about A Charlie Brown Christmas, don't we?
Oh, the film we reviewed last year.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring it up again.
Okay.
Do it.
Yeah.
Don't let us stop you.
I did. That's it.
Oh, that's it? Okay.
No. I feel like I learn everything and nothing every time I watch this again. I feel like every time I'm in a different state of mind every time I watch it. And there's like literally it taps into every like there's a huge range between like the biblical interpretation of Christmas and like the way it is today, and the range just keeps getting bigger, and I feel like that disparity matches like it's synchronous with the impact of Charlie Brown. And I feel like just because like things get worse every year, like there's no way they could have predicted how bad that commercialization would get. And I feel like it's fun to like keep getting brought back to that same, this is what it's really about thing. And I feel like that's like pretty much the pinnacle of any Christmas story, honestly, is like, especially within this context when everything's a meme, basically, like an early stage Charles Schulz meme. And I feel like that just adds more credibility to it. That it's just like a fun, like Charlie Brown gets bullied and everybody's their own character over and over again, and it's always enjoyable, and Snoopy's always there being a dog, and then you get hit with lines from Linus and you're like, what? I didn't know I was gonna get taught. and the tree, and then it culminates great. It's just it's crazy that something like this would culminate to a Charlie Brown Christmas, and it really goes very fast from being a meme to being like an actual lesson that can be taught to everyone, and that's very difficult to pull off, and especially at this time period and for so long ago. Like, this could have easily aged to something else. They could have made like in period references, but it was all about like very like specific themes that have just that are just constantly a part of like especially American culture. Like it's just that's why I think it's so great. And it's not like an amazing story from me, like it's not like an epic, or it's not like it encapsulates everything that Christmas is supposed to be about necessarily, but it does a pretty darn good job of it. And it's hard not to remember the entire thing once you've seen it maybe like 3 or 4 times, and I've probably seen it half the times that Christian has, and that's a lot. So
yes, I also rewatched that recently, and it hits you with a lot of things that you should have seen coming maybe, and there's this like strange balance of innocence and intelligence in the way it delivers those things. So yeah. I saw about exactly a week ago, I saw Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans. Finally. I'd been meaning to see this one for quite a while, and I was really, really impressed by it. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5, and coming off the heels of Zach's praiseworthy comments about go make a film, and it might be good. This is really a celebration of art, and I think I've said before on the podcast, I don't like music about music. I've been in a choir or two for years now, and there's been a lot of songs where we sing about the music has been my refuge and blah blah blah, like set to song, and it makes me cringe every time. And I was worried I would have something similar with the film, expressly about expressly fictionalized, named Fabelman instead of Spielberg, but really about Steven Spielberg's interest in film and his life experiences. And I did not feel the weight of that sort of cringe reaction at all, because how do I phrase it in my review? I said, he does not tell us how movies are great or show us how cinema is powerful. He shows us how and why cinema is valuable and why that matters. And it's as much a story about his life as it is about his filmmaking. And the performances are absolutely astounding. There are some really great child actors in here. Michelle Williams plays his mother and is great. Paul Dano plays his father. I've said before on the podcast, I think Paul Dano is a consummate professional and a brilliant performer, and this is also true here. Judd Hirsch has a small role in like 1 or 2 scenes. He like shows up and then he disappears, but it's super good. And David Lynch.
I've seen that scene.
Of course you have. Gosh, you really should see the whole film, Zach. It's really special.
I'm going to try to see it with my family, yeah.
Good. But yes, the David Lynch scene, I won't say what it is because I really think it's great if you don't know what's coming. But it's really, really something. And there's a really nice, appropriately sentimental score composed by none other than John Williams, the best to ever do it, of course. And yeah, it's really, really special. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. And, I think if film is something that's important to you, if you've enjoyed a handful of Spielberg's movies, you will definitely get something out of it.
Would you say you've overcome your uncertainties about Steven Spielberg? I remember about halfway through last season, or maybe the beginning of last season, you made a Letterboxd list in which you declared, "I just don't get this guy."
Yes.
Is that still the case?
I think that's still what that list says. If you go and check it, but no, I definitely have a broadly positive opinion of his work. There's everybody has their Ready Player Ones and and I still Jaws still just doesn't hit me a square in the face like it does everyone else, and maybe that's a me problem. But, between Indiana Jones and this and Close Encounters, which I saw after I made that list, there's no doubt in my mind that he's a legend and he deserves all of the reputation he has. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I've seen the David Lynch scene, and I've read his list of demands to be on set, one of which was there has to be Cheetos available. But I haven't seen the film itself, so I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Good.
Well, I'm going outside the film box because most recently, I always try to talk about the thing I've most recently consumed in terms of media. And last night, my family and I went to see the Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Oh.
Which, now, I don't really know much, or I didn't really know anything about the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, except that I knew that they had performed the metal version of Carol of the Bells, which shows up in a lot of car commercials, a lot of like it's become a very recognizable version of that song. But I was kind of under the impression that they were pretty much just an orchestra that used electric instruments and more modern instruments than perhaps your standard classical orchestra would. I was incorrect. The Trans-Siberian Orchestra is a little closer to Kiss if they played Christmas carols. This was a show filled with smoke machines and lasers and alarmingly large pyrotechnics. And it was fun, but it wasn't at all what I expected. I do think their stage presence is very similar to Kiss, and their music sounds a lot like Styx. And based upon that description, Styx, who sang "Come Sail Away" and "Renegade" and "Mr. Roboto."
Okay.
So, if that sounds like your jam, you will 100% love this show, because it's just 100% that the whole way. And it was a lot of fun. It was pretty corny. I will admit, there's a certain silliness to heavy metal performed around, I'll say hair metal. They aren't that heavy. Hair metal performed around a Christmas theme. And toward the beginning of the show, I felt a little bit like I was watching Stryper. For those listeners who are not aware, Stryper was a hair metal band in the 80s who sang about Christianity and the Bible. And with like no irony. So it did feel a little bit like that, where there's just kind of an inherent silliness to, first of all, hair metal, and then secondly, so silliness squared, there's kind of a silliness to hair metal about Christmas carols or religion. But, so, it's silly. it's corny, but it's also really fun. I'm not going to say it was the best concert I've ever been to. I've only been to 4, and it wasn't the best I've ever been to. But it was a lot of fun. And I would recommend it, again, if that sort of Kiss meets Styx singing Christmas carols sounds like your kind of thing. Also, every location that they go to, their string section is composed of local string performers, which I thought was kind of cool. Cool. Bringing in local talent based on each location you go to. I'm not going to give it a star rating because I don't know how to rate a concert, but I thought it was fun. And with that, we will move on to our next segment. There is no heat packed in the Signalman, so we'll move on to the Marvel. We'll move on to the Marvelous Cinema Tour, and this Marvelous Cinema Tour is the culmination of a lot, because today we're talking about Avengers Endgame.
On your left.
And I will say, this one's a really mixed bag for me. Because on one hand, I will admit, when I talked about Infinity War, I described how Infinity War isn't really it's difficult to describe Infinity War as a narrative with a structure, because it's not really a story with a beginning, middle, and end. It's more a chunk of a much bigger story. So it's kind of just action throughout the whole thing and a little tick of rising action and resolution at the end. Endgame is much more a story than Infinity War is. There is a set beginning, middle, end. There's an arc. There's conflict, which leads to a different method of solving the problem and then the eventual resolution. But at the same time, I think it's a lot less satisfying and exciting than Infinity War was. And I think part of that is the staggering length. I thought this was almost 4 hours. It's not that long. It's closer to like 3:15, 3:20 or so. If you're seeing the non-extended edition. But it's
what?
Okay, maybe I worked in a cinema when this came out, and then I continued to work in a cinema when a couple months later Marvel went, "Hey, if we put in the deleted scenes and re-release this, we can probably make more money."
And it worked.
No Way Home, yeah. They added like nothing.
they put in. I never actually saw the extended edition, but apparently the Hulk looks like Shrek at one point and saves a bunch of people using a radar dish or something like that. There are some very nice small moments that just make me wish that it was a smaller movie. So Ant-Man, when he comes out of the quantum realm, it seems like every Ant-Man thing just makes me wish for a smaller scale Ant-Man story. But when he goes home and he finds that his daughter has grown older, I just wanted a movie about that. I just want to see a movie about Scott Lang like coming to terms with his family having grown older while he's been gone. The scene at the end, the funeral scene, or I guess right after the funeral scene, where Happy is talking to Tony's daughter about how Tony always liked cheeseburgers. That's a really good scene. I wish we had more small scale stuff with Morgan. But most of the large scale, like big stuff, where Ant-Man punches a flying shark and Thanos comes back and he's a much less interesting version of Thanos because he's meant to be like 15 years younger or whatever. That stuff kind of failed to satisfy or interest me. And again, I really don't like the Russos as directors. And I thought it might just be, maybe it's just, after Captain Marvel, I thought, okay, maybe it's just kind of the Marvel system. It forces everybody to be like this. And I don't know, maybe if I was to watch some of the Russos' very earlier stuff, they'd be more interesting directors to me. But Captain Marvel had legitimate direction that was kind of hemmed in by Marvel and Disney, but not to the extent that this is. I think the Russos generally are just boring filmmakers. and everything looks like dirt in their movies, especially that ending battle scene, which is like looking at 50 shades of mud splattered across a wall that happens to be fighting each other. So yeah, mixed bag, 3 out of 5. I wouldn't say I really enjoy it. It's like fine. I'm not gonna do it the disservice of saying it's a 2 out of 5. I don't think it's a bad or poor film, but it's certainly not my cup of tea. And I really just think it's okay. I think it would possibly be a better film if Thanos wasn't even in it. If they killed him at the beginning and all the conflict and stakes were in the time travel. But you gotta have a movie. Yeah. You gotta have
that's kind of crazy
villain.
That's kind of a good point, Zach.
You gotta have a villain, and you gotta have a big fight.
Zach. That's Quantumania.
The issue is, I'm sure maybe that was pitched early on, and someone at Disney said, "Well, where's the big fight? Where's the big kaboom?" You gotta end on a big kaboom, and you can't end on a big kaboom when you're just kind of flying through time on a time heist. I also want to point out, bringing up the time travel reminded me of this. I don't like how they address time travel in this, but no time travel movie really makes sense, so I'm not going to say it doesn't make sense. What I will criticize the time travel in this movie for is their logic on time travel directly contradicts itself. Because they say that when you go back into the past becomes your future, so you're not actually changing anything about your past, which was the future in the area that you're going to. If you've seen the film, you should understand what I'm talking about. There's a scene where Hulk is saying, like, none of the stuff you've seen in movie, or Professor Hulk is saying none of the stuff that you've seen in time travel movies is correct. When you go back into the past, that past becomes your future. How are you going to change your own past? Or whatever. He's essentially saying that when you travel through time, it becomes a loop. So there's no point to worrying about changing the future or anything like that. Which, okay, sure, fine. But in that case, they later make a direct... It's essentially that scene in Austin Powers where... what is his name?
Basil Exposition.
I was going to call him Shaggy Fergalicious.
Write that down.
When Basil Exposition essentially turns to the audience and says, "I recommend you don't worry about this and just enjoy yourself." It's basically that same thing. But they basically say we don't need to worry about changing the future. And we can't just go back and kill baby Thanos because that wouldn't change the future either. But then, at the end, they make a deliberate point of Cap returning all of the stones and Mjolnir so they don't alter the present. But I thought you couldn't do that, Professor Hulk. I thought you couldn't do that. If he was just returning the stones, it wouldn't bother me so much. But the fact that he's taking back Mjolnir too, is so frustrating. Because why is he doing that? It's the only bit of the movie that I think there's bits of it that I think are not great. But that's the only bit of the film that I think violates its own internal logic. It's the only bit where I think it's the only bit of the MCU so far, other than that one scene of dialogue in Iron Man 3, where I've looked at it and gone, that's broken. That doesn't work in the script either.
That's broken.
Yeah. But 3 out of 5. Christian, I think you've been waiting to make a point this whole time.
Yeah, sorry. It never struck me that the returning the stones and the hammer was bad, but... What I thought was wrong was that we then get Joe Biden, Cap, and Falcon, and they have a conversation. Like, how did he get? Isn't he like once he goes back? Isn't he like there?
Well, but time still has to progress.
So... Right, but isn't he like in a different timeline, different universe, whatever? Once he goes back,
that's what I saw that too.
So. I think they would... I think if you were to ask the Russos about that, they would hand wave that away with the Professor Hulk thing as well.
Yeah.
When you go to the past, it becomes your future. So you're just living on the same timeline as your own future. You're not changing anything. I think they would say as long as he returned the stones, it wouldn't create an additional universe. But it does imply that Captain America has just been, like, sitting around for 60 years with Peggy Carter, retired and having tacos while the world has been under siege. And he's just been staying away from these very... It also implies, and I think this is very funny, that he had to time himself by the date and sneak up to that pond and just sit at a bench for like an hour while they did all that in the background. And not do anything. And did he pack a lunch? Did he bring a thermos? I'm so interested to see what that day was like for this old man sitting beside a pond.
No, the Russos you're gonna ask him to explain it. You'll be like, no, I don't think I will.
Well, no, I think I forget the Russos' names. The one that wears the glasses,
Joe and Anthony,
would probably go on like a 45-minute rant, and the other one would try to talk and only get like half a sentence in every now and then, and that would be how that would go, based on all of their interviews. All right. Time to move on from me complaining about Marvel, though. Oh,
Keep the train on the tracks.
Next time I'll be talking about Spider-Man Far From Home, and then after that, aside from No Way Home, that seriously is the last Marvel film that I've seen. So we're on the brink of going into uncharted territory here. It's time to move on to our longest-running segment, The Rundown.
I
can feel it calling.
Oh my god. Oh no. What have I done?
I'm ready.
Okay, good. That's good. One of us should be. Zach, are you ready?
Yes, I am ready.
Okay, 1 minute, a bunch of things about the Signalman that will be met with numbers. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Denholm Elliott.
4 to 5.
Bowler hats.
3 to 5.
Trains.
4 to 5.
The British Broadcasting Corporation. Is it corporate? I don't know.
3 to 5.
For God's sake, clear the way.
4 to 5.
Marcus Brody.
3 to 5.
The Misty Moors.
4 to 5.
480p resolution.
2 out of 5.
Inverness Capes.
3 to 5.
Being drawn to a place.
4 to 5.
British Rail Technical Gubbins.
2 to 5.
Tunnel collision.
1 out of 5.
Morse code.
4 to 5.
Abandonment of reason.
3 to 5.
Ding ding.
2 to 5.
Listening to the wind.
3 to 5.
The Bride.
3 to 5.
A literal red flag.
3 to 5.
Senseless Death.
2 to 5.
The Spectre.
2 to 5.
And 4 seconds to spare.
All right,
wow.
all right, oh.
Dang.
All right. Well, we've talked about the Signalman. We've brought our second holiday special to a conclusion. Mitchell, what will we be talking about on our third and final holiday special for the year?
I had to make sure I was reading the right thing. We're going to be talking about Silent Night with Linda Hamilton. If you remember her, she tried to shoot an innocent man in Terminator 2.
Oh.
Judgment Day. And, yeah. We all come together. If you ever heard about the World War I Christmas truce, this is the Hallmark version of that during World War II.
Okay.
Everybody stand fast, okay? It's fine. It's not like other Hallmark films.
Yeah.
I don't think. But it's still got that Hallmark flair. You still could get a card that resembles this movie somehow. Oh yeah, and I think it has what's his name? Red Skull, whatever. I'm trying to remember his actor's name.
Oh, why can't I remember his name either?
Hugo Weaving?
Hugo Weaving.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think Hugo Weaving's in it, yeah.
Nice. All right.
Yep.
Yeah. I know this is early Hallmark, before all their movies were about bland white couples kissing in gazebos. So, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you're looking forward to it too, tune in next time to hear us talk about Silent Night for our third and final holiday special of 2022. Until then, happy holidays!